Okay. Let's read scripture together. Today's scripture comes from the book of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. As usual, the words will be on the screen behind me, and I invite you to read God's word along with me. This is the word of the Lord. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called to the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine, but you have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Let me begin by teaching you a word that you may have never heard nor seen before. Transubstantiation. Say it with me. One more time. Okay. Now, this word comes from my love for compound words, if you hear it last week, and this is a word made up of the 2 words trans and substantiation. Trans meaning beyond, above, alter, or to change, and substantiation coming from the root word substance, which is the chemical makeup, the nature of something. This, by the way, is how the word transformation works, as we saw last week. Trans, beyond, alter, or change. Form or formation, the shape, the condition, the form of something. So transubstantiation is therefore to change the substance of something at the very root level, whereas transform is to transform or change the form or the condition of something. And if both of those sound the same to you and you're like, what's the difference, Pastor Pete? You'll see, number 1, why they're not the same, and number 2, more importantly, why it really matters that they're not the same. Now, the reason why I'm teaching you this word isn't because I love nerdy words, which I do, but the reason is because this is essentially the answer to the question that we're asking today, which is, how will we actually be and answer the call that God gives us? How do we do or become that which God calls us? And the answer is by allowing God to transubstantiate us, changing our very substance so that we become something that we are utterly not, much like Jesus does to the water by changing it into wine. How do we do it? That's how. The only way, again, let me make this clear. The only way we're actually going to answer the call that God gives to us is when we allow him to do that which only he can do, which is to change the very nature and substance of us so that we have what it takes to answer his call. If you're tracking along from last week, I said that the woman at the well who became the well, that she was transformed. I hope you agree, and as we go through this sermon, you'll see that more than that, I kind of buried the lead there. She was actually transubstantiated, in my opinion, more than merely being transformed, which is to say, transformation is one thing, transubstantiation is a whole nother level. So, if you are ready, or more, if you desire to be made new, transubstantiated, much like the woman at the well who became a well, much like water that is turned into the best wine anyone has ever tasted, then I really, really hope and pray that you would allow God to transubstantiate you. Amen? Amen. Now, here's the 2 things we must do. First, we have to establish Jesus' credibility as the master substantiator, which is the only way we're ever going to trust Jesus, number 1. And then number 2, which we'll get to in a little bit, is we have to then establish why transubstantiation is something that you should want, and therefore that we need to answer God's call. Let's do the first one, okay? Establishing Jesus' credibility as the master why am I saying like that? Master transubstantiator, okay? Now notice I said master transubstantiator, not just average or okay or, kind of capable transubstantiator, the master transubstantiator. Now, the reason why this is important is because actually, more than me telling you, you actually know the reason why this is important, because I think most of you, if not all of you, do this kind of credibility exchange almost every single day when you check Yelp. Every time you check Yelp, you're actually doing this thing. Take example, Texas barbecue, which, as you know, I love. If you love Texas barbecue like I do, then you should know that Spring Creek barbecue is technically Texas barbecue. As in, it's not that it's not Texas barbecue, it's just that it's just average, or it's passable. It's like it barely makes it as Texas barbecue, right? Which is reflected in the 3-star rating on Yelp. And if you take out their freshly baked rolls, then it probably is like a 2 or 1, if you know kind of idea. But if you then consider Truth Barbecue, which in my opinion is the best barbecue here in the city of Houston, which is a Texas Monthly top 10 barbecue joint for 6 years running, topping out at number 3 4 or 5 years ago, well, then that's a whole different story. And again, the 4.4-star rating tells you the difference. And I think that's underselling it, in my opinion, because I think it's better than 4.4. But the point is, and I think you know, the reason why you and I check Yelp all the time, religiously, as some people say, is because based on the Yelp review, we will choose where we go. Why? Because we just established the credibility of that restaurant, right? I mean, how else are we going to trust to see if a restaurant is good or not that we've never been to? I'm sure you know many people, right, that almost will never try a new restaurant unless, 1, bunch of their friends tell them that it's good, or 2, it has enough ratings and a high enough rating, right? As in, the bar is usually like 30 ratings, and then the bar has to be at least 4-star. If not, you're not going. Why? Because it's going to be bad, and you don't want to go to a bad restaurant and waste your money. Point is, likewise, the only way I think we are going to trust Jesus and allow him to transubstantiate us is if we properly establish his credibility as the master transubstantiator. Otherwise, I don't think you're going to trust him. I think a lot of times we say, oh yeah, we trust Jesus and we're going to follow him, but I actually don't think we do that. And actually, oftentimes, I think we do this thing where we go, should we trust Jesus? Is he really trustworthy? And so we're going to try to do that, and John does it for us. So let's do that, shall we? We begin in John chapter 20, verses 30 through 31. Therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. What John is telling us here specifically is that he chose to write about specific signs, you see them here, so that in those signs we would believe that 1, Jesus is the Christ, and that by believing in him that we would have life in his name. John is saying Jesus did many, many signs, but he specifically chose the ones that he did that you see on the chart there, so that in and through those signs, we would believe that, number 1, Jesus' credibility as God, the Son of God, the Messiah, is established, and therefore, he, being the Messiah, has the power to give life in his name. And this is exactly what John is doing in verse 11 of chapter 2 that we just read. The beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Note this word, the beginning. In Greek, the word beginning is ARCHE, which you should know that's our ministry name. And so while ARCHE certainly does mean the beginning of something, it actually means a bit more than that, because you can probably hear in the word, ARCHE is the word from which we get the English words archetype and architecture, right? So ARCHE then means simply the beginning of a series, the beginning of a pattern, the archetype or the prototype of something many like it to follow. So what John is saying is the water into wine sign is the first of the signs, but more so the prototype example of the kind of sign that proves that Jesus is not only the Son of God, but that you can have life in his name. But here's where things get interesting. Because the sign water into wine isn't your prototypical prototype. And that's because generally with prototypes, what you have is not only are they the first one, so that would be the one on the most left, not only the first kind, right, first prototype, they're generally always the worst. And the reason why is because as you go, you make revisions and revisions and revisions and revisions, and then in the end, you have the final product version, right? So you start out with the prototype, and then you end up with the final version. In fact, it's not uncommon for a prototype before it goes out to be purchased by the mass people that it would undergo anywhere between 20 to 50 different revisions to get to the final product. But with the water into wine sign, we are told that this is actually not the case, exactly the opposite. And how do we know? Because we're told that this sign manifested his glory. And interestingly, it's the only sign of the 7 that you saw that has this phrase attached to it. Have you heard of the phrase often imitated but never duplicated? If you're really pompous oldest child, you say that about yourself. I'm often imitated but never duplicated. You say that about your siblings. This is kind of the idea that the best or the first is the best. I'm sure none of you say that, but maybe you think it every once in a while. But the idea is simple. The idea is that with some things, the original is simply the best. No matter how many times you try to replicate it, no matter how many improvements you try to make to it and do something afterwards, the original, the OG as I like to call it, is simply the best and will always be the best. Take, for example, Lion King. You knew it was coming. There have been many sequels, prequels, and spin-offs, and I've seen almost all of them, I think, which is unfortunate. Even the one, Mufasa, the most recent one, the live-action prequel to them all, pretty good, but nowhere near as good. Simply, the original Lion King, the cartoon version with the original voices and the original songs is by far, without a shadow of a doubt, fact, in my opinion, fact, the best. The original Lion King, simply, often imitated, but never, ever, and never will be duplicated. Why? Because it's the ARCHE, it's the OG, it's the archetype prototype. So this water into sign, John is saying, is yes, the first, but more so the ARCHE, the prototype. Why? Because it is the thing that's going to show you who Jesus is most and how you can have life in his name. Which is to say that this is then the benchmark. It is the standard by which all the other signs are going to be measured, which is to say then if you understand this one, you'll understand all the others even better. But there's a little more with this idea of glory that makes this sign the OG prototype. Because if you trace the word glory through the book of John, two instances immediately stand out. First is in chapter 1, verse 14, which we saw last week, which reads, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." What John is telling us, as we saw last week, is Jesus becoming a human being, taking on our flesh to become like us, moving into the neighborhood, therefore, reveals, manifests, shows us his glory better than most things. And then the second instance that pops out is 17:1. This is right before Jesus goes to the cross, and he says to his Father, God, "Father, the hour has come, glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you." What John and Jesus are telling us is that the cross and the resurrection, therefore, is another place where he is going to be glorified, where his glory is most evident. This is the apex of Jesus' glory. Now, if you kind of consider it, this should be a little bit perplexing to you, because generally someone's glory is when they're at their highest, their most glorious form. Think like an Olympian who won a gold medal standing at the top of the podium, their flag coming down, the national anthem, that's their glory. Well, Jesus, we're told, his glory is when he's put up on a cross as he dies for our sin, which is odd. Which then means we have to kind of redefine glory because it's not quite what we generally think of it. So in the Bible, then, we find out that the glory of something is the essence of something or someone. Or more simply, the thing that makes something that something, or the thing that makes that someone, that's their glory. So if you take me, for instance, the thing that makes me, Pete Chung, is my glory. And if you know your family members, your siblings, your wife, spouses, or whoever, you probably can know their glory. You're like, that's the thing that makes that person, their glory. So with all of that, then, we're told, 1, Jesus moving into the neighborhood as a human being. 2, Jesus turning water into wine at this wedding in Cana. And 3, Jesus being crucified on the cross for the sin of the world and resurrecting 3 days later is by definition the thing that makes Jesus Jesus, or makes God be God. Now, I think you missed it, but here's what this is, and let me break it down for you. This is critical. What John is telling us is that somehow Jesus turning water into wine at this wedding reveals the essence of who Jesus is, what makes Jesus Jesus, what makes him the Son of God, all that stuff, somehow, in a similar manner or just as much as when Jesus becomes a human being and when he dies on the cross. Let me put it this way, and this might actually bring it home. Somehow, Jesus turning water into wine tells us, shows us, proves to us, establishes the credibility of Jesus as indeed God, the Son of God, just as much as Christmas, Good Friday, and Easter. So if you don't know who God is and you know what he's all about and you know what he can do, know this sign and it'll tell you just as much as Christmas, Good Friday and Easter, what he is all about. So what John is doing is establishing Jesus' credibility as the one who can do amazing things. One who is indeed the master transubstantiator. Because if this sign belongs, I hope you agree, somehow with Jesus becoming a human being, major, in Christmas, and Jesus dying on the cross and resurrecting 3 days later, even more major, well then this, I think, without a shadow of a doubt, establishes that Jesus is something different. He is the master transubstantiator. Okay? So one, we establish his credibility. Then second, why transubstantiation? This is kind of where things get fun. We get back to the story. The whole situation of this story of Jesus at the wedding in Cana begins with him at a wedding with his mom, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of the wedding, they run out of wine, which is sad. But more so than sad, it's bad news. And what's most interesting about the situation is actually then Jesus' mom jumps in to try to save the day, but she does so by telling her son Jesus to save the day, which then he kind of rebukes, almost tells her off, tells her to like be quiet or shut up, like kind of something like that. It sounds kind of like that. And then after he tells her that, then he goes and does it. Notice, he says, "Woman, what does this have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." Now, here's what's going on. Let me explain. Weddings in those days were a big deal, even bigger than today's wedding, which is hard to believe. And the reason why they were bigger wasn't because they were more elegant or more, elaborate or whatever. No. It wasn't that. It wasn't also because that they were longer, which they are. They're about a week or more long. Today's weddings, in our culture anyway, is about 1 day long. The reason why weddings in those days were much bigger was simply because of who attended these weddings. Let me explain. One of the biggest differences between our world and their world is simply how much people travel. AKA, in today's world, it's not uncommon for many of us to live in multiple states, multiple cities, even multiple countries throughout our lifetimes, right? But back in those days, to put it simply, the village in which you were born was almost always the village in which you died, okay? AKA, you didn't move, which means you grew up in a village and everyone knew you and everyone knew everyone. It's how it was always, life was always in those days. And because life was like that, well, what it meant was that whenever there was a wedding, it was easy because you would just invite the entire village. And because it was only the village and always only the village, and everyone in the village would always come, which means that every single wedding throughout your lifetime that you would go to, 95% of the people at the wedding were always the same. Okay? They never changed. And the reason why this is important is because for a culture that takes hospitality, treating your guests well, all that kind of stuff, it naturally creates this environment where you can just compare every wedding to every other wedding. And again, if you're Korean like me or Asian, you know how this is, right? All of us grew up always being compared to the next person that lives down the street, person at the school. Take your wedding and then amp that up. So your goal, whenever you have a wedding, was to almost always be better or at least just as good as the one previous and everyone that came before it. And if your wedding somehow was subpar, then that was bad news. And if your wedding ran out of wine in the middle, then you just became the dregs of your village. That was bad news. That's kind of like everyone in your class. Like let's just say, we'll just use this church. Students, we'll just use students as the easiest example. Let's say you all went to the same high school, okay? And everyone took the same tests. And everybody passed, but then one person got a 50. Not good. That's kind of what's going on, but worse. It's kind of like, actually, let me use an example. Imagine a Korean family inviting a brand new Korean family from the church to their house to be hospitable to them. Now, the standard, if you do this, if you're Korean anyway, is you're supposed to make so much food that your guests can eat until they literally feel like they're going to explode and can't walk out the door, and then they have to carry 3 bags of leftovers to go home with them, right? That's the standard. But imagine that you didn't make enough food where so much so that everyone didn't even get to eat all of it. They ran out in the middle and then they went home hungry. That would be bad. But multiply that by like 1 million. That's what's happening. And then if you take into account that scholars believe that this family member or this wedding people might be Jesus' family members, relatives, then Jesus' mom has every reason to try to jump in and save the day. You feel me? And again, if you're going like, well, today's like that. No, today's not like that. Because today, if you go to a wedding, again, most of the time the pictures show up on Instagram, they all look the same. And then they all look good. Because all the photographers and the editing, all that kind of stuff, you can never tell which wedding is better unless you were there. But because the guests never overlap, you can't compare. But back then, everyone knew whose was the best and whose was not, so on and so forth. And so this was a big, 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 big deal. And then if you take into account that although Jesus does save the day, if you take into account what he said right before, then you realize, wait, something is going on here. And so what Jesus is doing in this very shameful situation is this. He's saying, Mom, you need to know something about what I'm about to do. You need to know that what I'm about to do, I'm not doing as your son, but as Christ, your Lord and your God. That's why he says what he says. Notice, he says woman. By the way, woman in those days, in that culture, is not a derogatory term. I think the best equivalent is in English, you might call someone a lady, be like, hey lady, da-da-da, or ma'am, or miss maybe. In Korean, if you go to Korea and you go to a restaurant or whatever, you would call them ajumma. I know, sounds derogatory, it's actually not, depending on who it is. But, point is, but you would never call your mom ajumma at a wedding. That is rude. But what Jesus is doing is simple. He's saying, I'm doing something different than what you expect. Which is why then he says, what does this have to do with us? What does running out of wine have to do with us? In Greek, it literally is, what to me, to you, ? Which is a Greek idiom that says, what do we have in common here? What do you and I have in common regarding this water that has, this matter, this wine that's run out? And what Jesus is doing, again, isn't being rude or dismissive of his mom. He's trying to show her that what I'm about to do, I'm going to do what you asked me to do. But what I'm about to do isn't for the reasons that you think I'm doing it, or it's not the reasons that you want me to do it. I'm doing something so much more. Here's what he's saying, essentially, my translation. He's saying, look, Mom, while I am indeed your son, I love you. Before I am your son, I am your Lord and God. And because I am your Lord and God first, you and I do not have this matter in common. AKA, because I'm the Lord, the Son of God, before I am your son, what matters to you, which is fixing this wine issue and getting rid of the shame, is not necessarily what matters most to me. Because what matters most to me is much, much more eternally significant than saving this family and this couple from their shame in their village. And the reason why we know that is because what he says next, which is, my hour has not yet come. Now, earlier we noted how manifested his glory differentiates this sign versus the rest. Well, the hour differentiates it perhaps even more. Because after chapter 2, when Jesus says, my hour has not yet come, the next time he mentions the hour in the book of John is in the verse we saw earlier in 17, just before he goes to the cross, when he says, Father, the hour now has come, glorify your Son, so that the Son may glorify you. Now, if you know the book of John, you know that the hour, and we explained it a little earlier, is clearly the time when Jesus is saying, my mission is now about to be finished. And we know that because, do you know what Jesus says in John and only John after he goes to the cross? It is finished. My mission is done. So in saying what Jesus is saying to his mom before he does this thing, what Jesus is doing is setting the stage so that no one is confused about what is about to happen. What Jesus is saying is, in turning this water into wine, in transubstantiating water into wine, Jesus is saying, I'm going to show you not only what makes me God, Jesus, the Son of God, the Messiah, but I'm going to show you what my mission is all about, why I moved into the neighborhood in the first place, and why I'm going to do much later what I'm going to do, that only which I can do. And his mission, what he's saying is, I'm going to transubstantiate you just like I did to the water and making it into wine. Now, before we move on, there might be some of you in here who was really keen and saw that list, right? And said, wait a minute, Pastor Pete, hold up. I know you've been explaining, and you do this thing where you explain it really well, and you try to kind of, move us with your words and all that kind of stuff. But if I just look at the list, no matter how many times you tell me that the first one is the archetype, the OG, never, often imitated, never duplicated kind of idea, but I just can't get to where you're getting at, because when I look at the list, I just think the others are better than the first. I mean, simply put, what does the first one really do? Yeah, it saves his family from shame, but then what? Does it help people get drunk at a wedding? Like, that's not doing a whole lot in the world. But Causing a blind person to see, that's a big, big deal. Causing a paralytic to jump and dance, that's a big, big deal. Feeding 10,000 people who are hungry from 2 fish and 5 loaves, that's a big, big deal. And even at most, this one takes the cake. Raising someone who was dead back to life so that he can go back to his sisters, people that Jesus loves, that's a bigger and better deal than turning a bunch of water into wine because your family member ran out of wine at a wedding. That's a bigger deal. What am I missing? Are you sure this is the OG archetype? It's the best. And the answer to that, if you're wondering, is yes, I am sure, and here's why. Only in the first sign does Jesus transubstantiate. Track with me here. If you look at the other signs, notice what Jesus does. He either takes something that is broken and then fixes it back to what it's supposed to be, or he takes something which already exists and then makes more of it. Period. By the way, if you look at all of his miracles throughout his life, this is generally what he does in most of his miracles. He takes something that's broken and then he makes it better. For instance, he takes an eye that does not see, although it was destined and created to see, and then makes it see, fixing it. He takes a body that's supposed to run and dance and do all these things that's not able to do it because it's broken, and then he fixes it. Even in the dead body raised back to life, he takes a body that's supposed to be breathing and alive and then brings it back to life. You feel? But in this water into wine, what Jesus is doing is creating something totally new. And even though at first glance it might seem similar, the only thing that water and wine have in common is that they're both liquids. Other than that, chemically, elementally, they're totally different. Put it like this: nothing you do to water will ever make it into wine, period. Heat it, chill it, mix it, whatever you want. It will never become wine. Why? Because it lacks the ingredients, the substances that make wine, wine. Maybe this will help. Remember when I told you that transubstantiation is a higher level than transformation? It's because transformation is when you take water and you turn it into either a steam, gas, or an ice, solid. And although its form has changed, it's still water. Its substance is the same. Elements are the same. It's why the tagline for one of my favorite shows or movies, Transformers, is robots in disguise. AKA, no matter what you do to them, it's still a robot. It may not look like one to you because it looks like a car to you right now, but it's still a robot. Always a robot, never will be nothing but a robot. It just changes its form or its shape to make you confused, but in the end, it's still a robot. Robots in disguise. But water into wine, Jesus has transubstantiated it and made it something completely new. The chemical detail, the substance, the inner workings, completely new. Now you might be like, okay, Pastor Pete, thanks for the science lesson and all that nerdy stuff, but what does this have to do with anything? Well, here's what it has to do with anything. Did you notice how Jesus does the transubstantiating? Or in the vehicle in which he does it? Or in the thing that Jesus turns water into wine? He does it in these stone water pots used for Jewish purification customs. Now, for your information, the jars were these jars that Jews used. They would fill them up with water, and they would have these rituals whenever you needed to be cleansed of your sin. And at certain times, and by specific people and certain rituals, they would use them to cleanse people of their sin. And this was a really good thing, right? You would become pure again. And we know it's a good thing because God accepted this ritual, he used it, and indeed people could be pure from their sin. Except all of this, though it was good, had one major issue. And that issue is that it was only temporary, this cleaning. As in, you'd have to come back over and over and over again every time you needed to be cleaned. Now, if you're like, well, what's the problem with that? Well, here's what Jesus is doing. In turning water into wine, in these Jewish purification jars, Jesus is saying something huge. He's saying, these jars, you don't need them anymore. The purification that these jars provided, you don't need them anymore. That's why I made wine in them. Why? Because a new era has dawned. Everything is different now. Do you remember from last week? Why? Because I'm here. And why is he saying that you don't need them anymore? Well, throughout the Old Testament, there are these prophecies that talk about the Messianic age, aka when the Messiah is going to come, everything is going to be different. And all the Jews understood that this new thing, this Messianic age, was going to be the dawning of this new era, this new world, this new regime, this new age kind of an idea. And one of the classic signals or signs that indeed we've entered into this new era, can you guess? Was the abundance of wine. Which Jesus literally just did in producing 150 or so gallons of the best wine that anyone had ever tasted. That's abundance. And so what Jesus is doing is basically saying, I'm the Messiah. I am the Son. I am the God. I am He, as we saw last week. And now that I am here, you don't need the rituals, you don't need the jars, you don't need the water. Why? And I made it into wine. He's saying, just like I did to this water and to wine, I'm going to transubstantiate you so that you won't need them to be cleansed anymore. And if you take into account that this is done at a wedding and that God has always been known as the bridegroom, then what Jesus is declaring, just like he did last week, is I'm the one you've been waiting for. I'm the one who comes to change everything. I'm the one who's going to change everything. And most, I'm the one that's going to change you. That's why we're told that the disciples believed after this sign. But it gets even better. At this point in history, there's no way Jesus' mom, the disciples, or the servants would have had any idea what in the world Jesus was talking about when he says, my hour has not yet come. They don't have any reference point what the hour means. We know what it means. We know that the hour means Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, would die on the cross, on a Roman cross for everyone's sins. But no one at that time would have ever expected Jesus to die on a cross, let alone that be the hour of his glorification. Everyone probably would have thought that the hour meant something like where he goes and overthrows the Roman government and there's political overthrow, all this sort of stuff. But no one would have ever guessed what the hour means, which means then, what Jesus is saying just before doing the sign, when he says, my hour has not yet come, and then doing this thing, what he's saying is this: the time has not yet come for me to fulfill my mission. There's a lot of other things that I got to do before we get there. But when that time indeed does come, when my hour indeed does come, what I'm going to do and what you're going to realize I'm doing is going to be very similar to the thing that I'm about to do right now. He's saying, pay attention, because what I'm doing right now is the prototype of the thing that I'm going to do much later. What I'm all about, what makes me God, what makes me who you should trust, what makes me the God of the universe and everything, you're about to see it right before your eyes if you pay attention, because in the end, when I do the thing at the hour, it's going to remind you of this. It's going to be nearly the same. So what happens at the end then? Well, who remembers what happens when the disciples get to the tomb and what they find out? In the Gospel of John, Peter and John rush to the tomb. Do you remember what they find? They find Jesus' grave clothes folded and wrapped up neatly, like he just spent 3 days at an Airbnb or a hotel, and then he was done, and then he folded on nicely and made his bed, and he left because he was thankful for his stay. Grave clothes, there, he gone. Now, who remembers when Lazarus, the seventh sign of the signs, who remembers when he was brought back to life, what happens? Does anyone remember? Jesus calls him to come out, and he comes out, and he's wrapped up like a mummy, basically, in all of his grave clothes, and then Jesus goes, take those things off of him, which meant that he didn't have the power to take them off. Very, very different. Now you're like, what's the point, Pastor Pete? Well, if you've been here with us for a while, you may know this, but the difference between the two is astronomical. Because what it means is that what happened to Lazarus was resuscitation. Yes, another fancy word. But what happened to Jesus was resurrection, and the two are completely different. Here's how. Resuscitation is actually a medical term. As the doctors in here know, resuscitation is when someone who was dead for a moment is brought back to life. Have you ever seen anyone give CPR, or if you've seen the movies where they, do the thing, someone like washed up on the beach and they're doing the CPR, it's not working, and they get the little, Peter, what is that called? Is it an EKG? No, it's not. Is that what it is? The little shock things? Anyways, very dramatically they go, charge, clear, and they do it over and over again, and then after a little while what happens? The person, and then the water comes out and they start breathing again. That's resuscitation. Because technically that person was dead. as in their heart wasn't beating, they weren't breathing, so they were technically dead. But then because of CPR or the whatever electrocharge thing, yada, 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 his heart starts pumping again. He starts breathing. He's brought back to life. Resuscitation. Okay? Definitely dead, but definitely alive again. And I know a little bit more about this now that I do a little bit of hospital chaplaincy work. I get code blues all the time. That's basically when someone's in a room and then they code, which means their heart stops. And then everyone in the hospital knows code blue, and then everyone rushes there and they do everything to try to bring him or her back to life. And they do. And they breathe again and they're living. And this is an amazing thing that happens. In the case of Lazarus, really cool because it was 4 days, which doesn't happen. But the sad reality with resuscitation, as great as it is this. No matter how many times a person is resuscitated, their final destiny will never change. And that's to do what? Die. As in Lazarus died eventually. All the other people that Jesus resuscitated back to life in his ministry, they all died. But Jesus, because he was resurrected, totally different. The resurrected body, totally new. The resurrected life, the never ever dying, only living forever kind of living. It's why when Jesus ascends from the earth, he kind of like floats away. Why? Because he never is to die again. What we're being told is that when Jesus, after his resurrection, he comes out as a brand new person, a person who cannot die anymore. The reason why he leaves his clothes and folds them and leaves them there is because he's saying, I don't ever and I will never need these ever again. Thank you very much. Resurrection, then you're realizing, is transubstantiation. Why? Because the thing that wasn't is completely new. What Jesus is saying is, I, the person who can take water into wine, the thing that doesn't have anything chemically, elementally, to make it wine, I can take you. In you and in me, in all of us. You don't have anything that guarantees life forever, but I can make you such so that you will never, ever die. You're totally new. And what we're being told is only when that happens in you, little by little, will you then answer the call that God gives to you. Because the call is otherwise too great for you to do anything else. You and I, church, what we're told is we don't have what it takes to answer God's call. But when he transubstantiates us, when he begins the resurrection life in us through his resurrection, then we will be made completely new. We will go from stale water to fine wine, unlike anything the world has ever tasted. And what God is saying is, if you want that life, come, let me transubstantiate you. Amen? And let me just say, if you didn't answer amen to that, I hope your heart is being stirred to want to say it. You're just too embarrassed because you're too Asian or Korean or whatever to say it. And I mean that. Because what else could there be than this? Jesus is offering all of you, all of us, a life that you can't get on your own. If your life feels like boring water, the non-carbonated sparkling kind with no flavor, the tap water that you're not supposed to drink, well, he's saying, I invite you to come and become wine, fine wine. Now, here's then how it happens, how we make it happen. 2 things, we'll finish. Invite and obey. If you want Jesus to transubstantiate you into something that you're totally not, a resurrected life, then you must invite and obey him. But this is actually a bit more complicated and more involved than you might think. Did you notice why Jesus was at the wedding? Small detail, but important. He was invited to the wedding. Which means then, if we are going to be transubstantiated, the thing we must do is invite Jesus into our lives. Now you're going, well, what's with that? Jesus has an open invitation to come into my life and do whatever he wants. Does he? Does he actually? Think about it. Because if he did, then whenever he pops up, he's able to pop up anytime, which is kind of scary to think sometimes, whenever he wants and tell us whatever he wants to do. And whenever he does, we're not supposed to say anything but just simply yes, if he does indeed have an open invitation. What I'm suggesting is for most of us, he doesn't have an open invitation. But more so, if you then think about what Jesus was being invited to, then it makes even more sense. Think about it this way. Jesus was invited to a wedding, right? For those of you in here who've been married or have attended a wedding, you know what this is like. Wedding invitations aren't simple things. You know that, right? If you've ever gotten a wedding invitation, first of all, you need to know it's fancy. Really fancy envelope, Lots of really cool letters, yada, yada, yada. It's also physically addressed to you. It's still one of the few things in 2025 that comes physically, which means they had to write the thing or print out the label and then send it to you physically. It's a special invitation. But that's not even where it ends with this invitation. Because if you send out an invitation for someone to come to your wedding, then you also have to then think of, where are they going to sit at this wedding? What am I going to feed them at this wedding? What am I going to do to entertain them at this wedding? How am I going to make this feel special for them at this wedding? At one wedding I went to go sit at my table after I was done officiating, and at my table was a customized coaster made out of marble, engraved with my name on it, Pete. I put my coffee on it every single morning. All to say, invitation, if you're going to try to invite Jesus into your life, it better mean something and you better try. It's not, okay, cool, Jesus, come. No, that's not how this works. You better think through it. You better process where he's going to sit, how long he's going to stay, what he's going to say, what his opinion means to you, and then you better be ready to have him come and enter into one of the most grand parts of your life, most important parts of your life, akin to a wedding. Are you inviting Jesus into your life? Be honest. Second, then we must obey. Jesus tells the servants, do whatever he tells you to do. Just do it. Just obey. Now, here's the thing about obedience that I think we need to make clear. And this you're probably not going to like. The students in here are for sure not going to like it. Did you know? With obedience does not require, nor should it require, the agreement, the comprehension, or the understanding of the ones obeying. Did you know that? Obedience, by strict definition, whether you agree or not, whether you think there's a better way, obedience is to do that which you're told to do, period. Do you remember this idea from a while back, if you were here? Standing under, not over. In the song we're about to sing after this, there's a line. We only sing it once in the song. I think that's tragic. I think we should sing it over and over and over again. And the line in the song called New Wine is, when I trust you, I don't need to understand. You see, obedience is determined by the one who's commanding. It requires the logic, the thought, the care, and the love of the one who's commanding, the one who's giving the orders, which means just like Jesus' mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you to do, whenever you think about obedience, obedience is always going to be a challenge. Why? Because what if Jesus tells you to do something that you don't want to do? Are you going to do it? Often, Jesus' command to us will be to wait. But we don't like waiting too much. Not in our culture, not in our time. Or even more, what if Jesus tells you to do something that you think is downright stupid? Will you do it? And if you're like, Jesus wouldn't tell me to do that, are you sure? Because what he tells the servants to do is categorically stupid. It's just that we know what happens in the long run. They have no idea what's going to happen. Fill the water jars with water for what, Jesus? That's a lot of water. And by the way, again, you got to think about those times. They don't have water hoses. They got to take a big old basin, 150 gallons. Do you know how 150 gallons? That's 150 milk jugs. They got to take a big old basin and then manually fill these water jars over and again. Do you know how long that takes? And what, you think people aren't noticing what they're doing? There's a panic and a frenzy. Wine has run out. They got to be thinking, what does this do, Jesus? This is water in these jars. What are you doing? It's absolutely stupid if you don't know the ending, which they don't. So if you're told to do by Jesus something that you don't agree, something that you think is stupid, will you do it? Because obedience requires that you do, because that's what obedience is. Do whatever he tells you to do, period. So church, how do we answer the call to which Jesus calls us to do? We told you the answer from the beginning. Allow him to transubstantiate you, to make you and I something that we cannot be, that which we do not have the ingredients to be. And when we do, here's the promise. You will become more like God. You know what that means? That means your sin will be less and less and less. It's like purging crap out of your life. And in it will come his righteousness and his goodness, his life. And that's how you become like fine wine, aging all the time, but better. Then as you do, that you become more righteous, more gracious, more loving, more amazing by the hour. little by little until the final hour comes, that when Jesus returns to make all things new. But until then, church, if you want to be the person that God calls you to be, if you want to be his son, his daughter, his bride, all those things, then you must invite and obey. Invite him into your life. And then obey when he tells you what to do. Yeah? So as we finish then, I'm going to give you a minute or two to do indeed just that. Can you maybe for the first time invite Christ into your life? Into the parts of your lives that are the weddings, the most important things. Maybe your future for the students in here, your grades or whatever. For the parents in here who don't have children or are trying to have children, maybe your children, your careers, whatever it may be. Will you invite Jesus purposefully the way that you would if you were inviting him to your wedding? And then will you prepare your heart and say, Lord, I'm ready to obey, no matter what it may be. I will do indeed whatever you say to do. Take some time, reflect and pray, and then we'll sing all together to give him the glory he deserves.